Hello, and welcome to a short informational video about fish that has given us scrumdiddlyumptious caviar and maintains environmental stability, but is dying out. This is the Russian sturgeon. Classification: the Accipenser or more commonly known as the Russian sturgeon, is a species of sturgeon from the Accipenseridae family. They are descendants to the now extinct Paleolithic or the Paleolithioids, which lived around 419 million years ago near the end of the Silurian period. The Russian sturgeon also has some relatives, which includes the Persian, Siberian, and Chinese sturgeon variants.
Abiotic and biotic factors. The Russian sturgeon is native to the Black Sea, the Sea of Azov, and the Caspian Sea. It can also be found in some freshwater rivers that connect to these water bodies. Since it's found in both salt and freshwater environments, it exhibits an anadromous lifestyle. In these aquatic environments, the Russian sturgeon usually stays close to the seafloor where it can pick up some delicious detritus to eat or hide in nearby aquatic plants. The depth level in which these sturgeons are found are around 0 meters to 150 meters underwater, so they don't usually hang out with the anglerfish folks. Next, let's take a look at the inner workings of how the Russian sturgeon maintains homeostasis in its environment. In case you didn't know, homeostasis is the regulation of body processes to maintain a balance between internal and external elements. It's like sweating, where the sweat will absorb heat from the body and release it as waste heat when the wind picks up. The method of thermoregulation or homeostasis for the sturgeon is mainly poikilothermic and ectothermic. That means if the external temperature in their environment is changed, their internal body temperature will also change. This makes the Russian sturgeon extremely sensitive to changes in its environment, as it is cold-blooded and does not produce a lot of body heat. So if the temperature gets too cold or too hot, the Russian sturgeon perish or will have to change its behavior dramatically in order to adapt to the temperature change.
Alright, now let's talk about how the Russian sturgeon survives in its environment. So the sturgeon is a consumer in its ecosystem. Mainly eats worms, crustaceans, mollusks, and small fishes, which make it a carnivore. The sturgeon can grow up to 2 to 2.4 meters long, and their bodies are covered with bony plates. The sturgeon also has tactile barbels hanging beneath the snout, kind of similar to the catfish, only with fewer whiskers. Since it's a large fish with bone armor, this prevents most potential predators from targeting it as prey. Next, remember how the Russian sturgeon is cold-blooded? That means the poor fellow doesn't carry on a built-in fan or heat warmer, therefore it usually hangs out in aquatic environments where the temperatures are mild, 15 to 23 degrees Celsius. Did you know the Russian sturgeon possesses a specialized kidney that enables it to survive in different bodies of water with different salt levels? These kidneys allow intensive potassium secretion, whilst providing a lower magnesium secretion, which helps regulate osmotic and ionic balance between it and its environment. This means it could live in oceans and freshwater bodies, which gives it many suitable habitats to live in. Lastly, Russian sturgeon does not act like your typical fish that swims around in groups. These guys are mostly loners, feeding near the seafloor and doing whatever they do in their free time, alone and hidden. This ensures the most protection from predators, as you can't be hunted if they can't see you. This also helps reduce competition for food because you aren't sharing any with anyone and it's just yourself finding food. Now let's take a look at how the Russian sturgeon reproduce. The Russian sturgeons are considered late bloomers in the aquatic society. For males and females, they usually reach maturity around 8 to 16 years. That's pretty long for the average fish. What's really mind-blowing, however, is that this species can live up to 48 years, making it outlive at least 8 generations of certain fish species. Once they're mature, a sturgeon will swim upstream to a freshwater river during a breeding season, which typically occurs around April to June. The typical female usually lays around 59,000 to 806,000 eggs per female, and sometimes even up to 1 million. Once laid, these eggs will look like a bunch of black marbles stuck together, kind of like tapioca. When the egg hatches, the tiny larvae stage Russian sturgeon will develop rapidly. But of course, rapid, as in 8 to 16 years.
With at least 59,000 eggs for each female sturgeon, you won't believe that this aquatic animal is critically endangered. Unfortunately, according to the IUCN Red List, the truth is that the Russian sturgeon is critically endangered. And with it critically endangered, that poses a risk to the health and well-being of the ecosystem it lives in. According to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Russian sturgeons, when feeding, disturb sediments on the bottom of lakes and oceans. This will kick up nutrients that may have settled down and miss microorganisms. By kicking up these nutrients, producers like algae and bacteria will have an easier time collecting these resources. This fish also creates home for other fish when digging out spots to lay their spawn. Sometimes the Russian sturgeon can dig too much, which results in extra space that could be used as spawning grounds for other fish species. It's a win-win. However, the benefits don't have to end there. According to an article by the Scuba News, Russian sturgeons are an indicator of pristine water quality. So, if you see a sturgeon swimming down a river nearby, that means the water in that river is very clean. Just the presence of the Russian sturgeon can also be beneficial. According to another article called Sturgeon 2020, places where there are Russian sturgeons swimming around have promoted conservation programs that realizes an alternative way of income without hurting these fish. Some ways include ecotourism, aquaculture, and local handicrafts, which helps spread awareness of heritage and importance of the sturgeon.
Now speaking of conservation, let us now dive into the opposite part of the story where the dangers and certain aspects of HIPCO that brought this once thriving species down on its knees. HIPPCO, or HIPCO, is an acronym to the 6 major human-driven threats to biodiversity and the environment. Let's start with H, or habitat loss. According to an article by the WWF, due to dam construction, the Russian sturgeon has lost 70% of its spawning grounds in the Caspian Basin all the way to the Black Sea. Next up is invasive species. An invasive species is a species of animals that are introduced into a new ecosystem, purely through accident or intentionally, that harms the ecosystem. In an article on PubMed, sturgeons are introduced outside their natural ranges where they may compete and hybridize with native species and transmit parasites and diseases. Why is this a threat when we are putting more sturgeons into the wild? Well, for starters, introducing a new species into a new ecosystem can result in unexpected consequences like disease transmission or even over competition for food. Sometimes introducing the sturgeons to a new environment can also kill them off quicker, as they won't be able to adapt quickly enough to fight off the new diseases in the new ecosystem. Talk about being ironic.
Continuing on is population growth. As human populations grow exponentially over the past years, our demand for resources increases. Especially near the Caspian Sea basin, the demand for fish and water supplies increased so much that it has physically impacted the volume of certain lakes near the basin, and that's the decline of Russian sturgeon population since they lost their habitat. Next up is pollution. Near the Somme and Desna rivers, the WWF has filed a report about how there's a huge decline of Russian sturgeons due to the pollution near the area. According to the WWF, the use of pesticides, organic waste, and heavy metals in many industries has led to the degradation of water qualities in rivers like the Volga, Ural, and Danube. Let's take a look at how pollution can kill these unique species. When pollutants enter the river, it spreads out and contaminates the water. If the sturgeon perform respiration in this muddy water, the contents in the water will kill the sturgeon. Such waste in the water will also reduce oxygen levels, so the Russian sturgeon can also suffocate. If these don't bring a sturgeon down, however, it will surely bring down its offspring. According to an article by Natalia M. Restivo, eggs were deformed when subjugated to contaminated water. This was result in the death of the larva inside and caused dramatic decline of reproduction rates for the sturgeon in the whole Caspian Sea basin. The consequences literally spread like wildfire. Second to last is climate change. Recent studies have shown that areas in which Russian sturgeons have lived suffered dramatic temperature changes due to climate change. For example, temperature rises during the summer. This is bad news for the Russian sturgeon because it will cause something called chronic heat stress. Chronic heat stress is when heat from the environment causes chronic stress to the body. When chronic stress is pressuring the body, it can cause the immune system to malfunction, which is what happens to the Russian sturgeon. When the immune system is down, bacteria and viruses will instantly get to work, thus causing the Russian sturgeon to perish because it can't fight back. Finally, we come to the greatest contributing factor that has led this amazing fish species to the near extinction. Overexploitation, which includes overfishing and poaching, has been leeching off of all sturgeon species, but we'll cover what it has done to the Russian sturgeon specifically. As you might know, the sturgeon species is well known for its caviar, especially the Russian sturgeons. Usually, a poacher would designate a schedule to start catching, since the sturgeon's seasonal migrations are easy to track. That makes them easy targets for poachers who can just sit and wait for the fish. One infuriating factor about the whole poaching operation is that fisheries and other poachers don't distinguish between male and female sturgeons, which means they check male sturgeons for caviar. They also don't distinguish different species with different conservation statuses, so the poachers can also wind up catching totally unrelated fish species that can also be endangered. Essentially, it's just see and catch without a care in the world.
Finally, let's get to the last part of the video, which is natural selection. Think of natural selection like an invisible weed picker that slowly weeds out species over time because they couldn't adapt to the changing environment. Natural factors that limit the Russian sturgeon include predators like sea lions and sharks. Sometimes the weather might get too hot or cold, causing sturgeons to perish through chronic stress and diseases. The sturgeon's soul maturation rate is also a factor that could lead to population decline if the sturgeon is taken out too quickly. Currently, human activities are decimating this species' habitat and overall population. With no intervention made, this species will surely go extinct in the near future. And if they do, the unseen consequences will befall the ecosystem it lived in. But don't worry, there are currently many organizations out there right now trying out many different approaches to restore the Russian sturgeon population and its habitat. Such organizations include the WWF, IUCN Red List, the police and coastal guard forces of Romania, Bulgaria, and Ukraine. In 2019, the WWF organization released more than 20,000 Russian sturgeons into the Danube River. For the Bulgarians, they went for law enforcement methods. During a patrol routine, the border police reported 14 out of 15 checks yielded confiscated kamashi, which is another name for hooks. However, this is nothing compared to the control effects made by the Romanian police. At a national level, a total of 6,604 controls of fishing, fish production, trade, and transport were conducted by the Romanian police in 2023, and a total of 1,368 controls were performed in the 5 most relevant counties. Here's a look at the numbers of controls per country. The analyzed data on control efforts shows that the Romanian police is undertaking by far the most control efforts regarding fishing in Tosei County, followed by activities in Iomicha County. In these 2 counties, also most illegal activities regarding sturgeons were reported by all authorities, both in the past 8 years as well as in 2023 alone. With these efforts, things are looking good for the sturgeon. The protection efforts made by these groups ensure safe maturation of the sturgeon and its release back into the wild. But we should still be cautious, as replenishing the population might encourage poachers to keep hunting these fish illegally.
And that concludes our video about the Russian sturgeon. What do you think? Are the current efforts made enough? You can contribute to current efforts by signing up at Lifeboat for Sturgeon using the link in the description below. See you next time.